Hi, and welcome to Quilting with Lori. My name is Lori Dickman. Today we are going to be working on an Independence Day little wall quilt. I'm calling it the Scrappy Independence Day Bouquet. We're using squares and strips from your scrap stash. Let's see what it looks like and let's see how to put it together. Here is a picture of the quilt itself. And this morning I just made this up with 4 blocks. There is a PDF attached. Don't forget to grab that PDF. We're basically making this with 4 blocks. And these 4 blocks are rotated within the quilt itself and creates just a beautiful scrappy quilt. And we're using squares and strips from our stash. So here I folded the quilt in quarters here. So there's 1 block. And you'll see that the bouquet is made up of the red and white squares. And then the base of the flower is the navy blue with the bottom here. So these are larger rectangles that are sewn together. And I'm going to show you how that is done. And here are it's a half square triangle, very simple to do all of this. You make 4 of these and then you sash it. And what I've pulled from my stash and what you'll want to grab are your 2.5-inch strip container. So I've pulled the cream or the white and the red strips, 2.5-inch strips from my container. I also pulled my 2.5-inch square container, and I pulled a lot of creams or whites and reds from that. And then I also pulled my 5-inch square container because that's where we're going to make the white and blue half square triangle from. Then I also pulled 10-inch squares in whites and blues to create these wonderful rectangles. Before I take you to the tabletop here to show you how to put this quilt together, and this is the simple wall quilt that I've just shown you is something that I put together this morning. It's very quick, very easy. There is a simple little PDF that gives you the information on the block and the quilt itself. There is also a PDF attached in the description box below, which gives you the templates for this quilt. If you're a quilter that prefers to use templates, I have them available for you. Just make sure you download those. If you're not able to access the description box below to get these templates, go out to my website, quiltingwithlori.com, and go to the blog, and you'll find the blog that corresponds to today's tutorial, and then you can grab the PDFs there. Make sure whenever you print PDFs that have templates that you print them at 100% so the size is accurate. And then before I get to today's quilt to show you that, I also want to mention you might want to go to my website, quiltingwithlori.com, and look at the Learn tab. Scroll down on that Learn tab to find my mystery quilt. And I've got a number of wonderful mystery quilt patterns out there for you with their PDFs. So that's all available to you. That is free. This is a really beautiful patriotic quilt that I did in a mystery quilt class from 2020. So if you'd like to make that, that's available and that's out there with the videos, the PDFs, etc. So just check that out. Now let's head to the tabletop and see how we'll make today's quilt. So here is the block. Actually, it's the entire quilt, but I've just folded it in quarters so that you can see the entire block as it sits here. For those of you who might be new to my channel, I do want to let you know about a video that I have available on my YouTube channel. It's actually on the home page of my YouTube channel. If you go out there, you'll find the video that corresponds to this techniques book, Speedy Solutions to Cut and Organize Your Scrap Stash. It will teach you everything you need to know to get your scraps cut, sorted, organized, and ready to use to make beautiful quilts. It's wonderful to be able to pull things from your own scrap stash and be able to create gorgeous quilts. Between these 2 books, this is the techniques book, this is the patterns book, you'll get 17 scrappy patterns. So that's something that's on my website. I'll have a link below in case you'd be interested in taking a peek at that. But I do recommend that you go out and watch the video on my YouTube channel so that you'll see exactly what you need to do to get your scrap stash cut, sorted, organized, and ready to use. Now let's take a look at what we need for this quilt and actually for each one of the blocks. For the bouquet in this scrappy block, which is this 9-patch right here, it's made using the red and cream or red and white squares from your stash. So I pulled 2.5-inch squares. So I have 2.5-inch whites. I needed 4 of those and 5 reds. I also needed 1 2.5-inch square for this corner unit here. And then these are 2.5-inch strips. I needed to pull my 2.5-inch strips, and I used some creams here, and they were subcut into 6.5-inch strips. So these are 6.5 by 2.5. 2 of those, and all of the rest of this is 2.5-inch squares. That's how I made this block right here. Now, for the half square triangle, I pulled 5-inch squares in blues and creams. I put them together, just like you've seen me do many, many times on my channel. Right sides together, drew a diagonal line from one side to the other, sewed a scant 1/4 inch on both sides of that line, and then I cut on the drawn line so that I ended up with 2 complete half square triangles. It's important then that they each get squared up to 4.5 inches. These half square triangles must measure 4.5 inches. So once that was done, then I went to my 10-inch squares and I subcut that into 2 5-inch rectangles. I needed white and blue. And I subcut the 10-inch square into 2 rectangles that measured 5 inches by 10 inches. Then I just removed 1/2 inch from the length because what I really needed was a 5 by 9.5 inch length of fabric. So this is just a review on that half square triangle. So I had the dark and the light placed together, drew my line, sewed a scant 1/4 inch on each side of that drawn line, cut on the drawn line, and then I ended up with 2 complete half square triangle units. This is when it's imperative that they each get squared up to 4.5 inches. All of these half square triangle units here must be 4.5 inches, so that needs to be done. Now let's get to these 10-inch whites and blues. Here you'll see that I've already cut my blue in half, so it's 5 inches, and it was 5 by 10. I removed 1/2 inch, and here's the white. I've cut it in half, but I have not yet removed that 1/2 inch, so we'll do that next because we want this to be 9.5 inches long, 5 inches wide. So I'll cut this off. And that's how we're going to make these half square rectangles, if you will. And so I've trimmed off that excess of the white, so now I have a 5 by 9.5 inch blue, I have a 5 by 9.5 inch white. So they're cut and ready to go. And what you're going to end up doing is cutting them on the diagonal from corner to corner. But you do have to make reverse image because these are reverse image here. So it's imperative that we're cutting them on different diagonals. In fact, if you look at your templates here, you'll see that they are the reverse image. That's very important. And that's how you're going to make both of these. They're going to be a mirror image, if you will. So let's do that. Let's get these cut so you can see how they're going to go back together. So I want this blue and white fabric and this blue and white fabric to be my Scrappy bases for this flower. And this particular half square rectangle's already been cut and it's on that diagonal. Now I have to make sure that I don't cut this blue on that same diagonal or I'll have the identical half square rectangles. I need this set to be cut on the mirror image or the other side. So I'm going to make sure that I cut it from this corner to this corner. The white is basically there's really not a front or a back to that white one. So I'm just putting it right behind there and I'm going to cut these both together. But I want to make sure that when I cut these 2 pieces that they are going to be a reverse image of this one. So let me get my ruler. I'm going to cut from corner to corner. All right, and so what I want to use are these 2 pieces, and they're going to be sewn together just like we typically would with a 1/4 inch seam allowance from here, from top to bottom. And then we'll press it so that the dark, the seam allowances are pressed to the dark. So this one I've already done. I've already sewn it and pressed it. This one, I'm going to sew it at 1/4 of an inch, and then I'll press it. Let me get it sewn. I'll bring it right back to the tabletop, and you can see it. And I also do want to point out, if you prefer to use templates to create these, you're welcome to do that. The PDFs are available for you. You can just cut your strip of fabric by 5 inches wide in the whites and in the blues, and then create your templates from that plastic, and then trace that onto the wrong side of your fabric. And you can make mirror images that way of your whites and your blues. Let me get this sewn. I'll bring it right back. All right, I finished this one. I've sewn it and gone ahead. I haven't pressed it yet, but I've finger pressed it. Now what we're going to do with both of these half square rectangles is to get them squared up to the proper measurement. And what we want them to end up being is 4.5 inches wide by 8.5 inches long. So I'm going to use my OmniGrid square up ruler. First I'm going to press this, and then I'm going to square it up to 4.5 inches wide by 8.5 inches long. Let me go do that. I'm going to press them, square them up, and I'll bring them back and lay things out for you. All right, I'm going to use this mat here, a gray mat, so that you can actually see some of the lighter pieces that I'm laying down here. But here I have my 2 rectangle half square triangles laying here. Make sure that the darker side will be touching the bouquet, which we'll put right here in a minute. Here's the half square triangle, and the points all touch here in the center, as you can see. So that's how you're going to lay that out. You're also going to cut 6.5 inch long by 2.5 inch wide strips of fabric from your strip stash. So I have that in here, and you're going to need 1 light 2.5 inch square that will go up to the top there. So that's where all of that's going to lay. Now we're going to put together our little bouquet, and we've got 5 of these red squares that you're going to place in here. And you'll have 4 light squares, and you're making a 9 patch, just a simple 9 patch. So we're going to sew this together first, then we're going to attach these with that so that you've got 1 larger block here, and then we're going to attach this rectangle to this section and this half square triangle to this section, and then sew the whole thing together. This square will end up, or this block will end up 12.5 inches squared up once we have it all pieced together. Let me get this 9 patch sewn together, and I'll show you what that looks like. All right, so I did the 9 patch here with the reds and the whites. I squared it up to 6.5 inches. Then I've added the 2.5 inch by 6.5 inch strip to the side. I've added the 2.5 inch white square to the 2.5 by 6.5 inch strip, which is going to go on top there, or in your, as you're looking at it, it would be on the bottom. But that's going to be sewn there. And so that unit will get sewn together. Then we're going to sew this unit to this. We'll sew the half square triangle with this one, and then we can piece the whole thing together. So I'll quickly get that all sewn together, and our block is finished. It goes together so fast. Here is another step for you to see. I've sewn this section to that piece, and I've sewn the half square triangle to the half square rectangle. Now I can piece them together just like that, and then I can press it and square it up to 12.5 inches. I'll be right back. I finished the block, and I've pressed it, and it's got to be squared up to 12.5 inches. And then when you're putting these blocks together, you're going to tilt them so that the center half square triangles are actually touching toward the center of the block, and the bouquets are facing out toward the outer edge or the outer corners of your quilt. And here is a overview of that quilt. There you go. Isn't it beautiful? I think it's so very pretty, and it really does go together quickly. I just did simple little borders on the outside edges. You could be as fancy as you want, just create whatever you'd like. Maybe you could even use some of these fun half square rectangles out in the borders. But I hope that you'll all try putting this together. Don't forget to grab the PDFs and get those printed or saved to your computer. If you prefer to use the templates, you're welcome to do that. I've got those included here for you. So everything is there for you to create this block and this quilt. Thanks so much for joining me today. I hope you all have a wonderful week coming up. And until next time, happy quilting.